Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, my name's Claire, and this is Yoli. I make videos all about houseplant care, sharing tips and tricks I've learned over the years to help keep your plants happy and healthy. And in today's video, I'm going to take you through everything you need to know to keep your Calathea Orbifolia happy. This is one of the first types of Calathea that I ever added to my collection because I thought it was absolutely beautiful. And it is also one of the first types of Calathea that I successfully killed. So over the years, I've taken a lot of time to get to know this plant, figure out what it likes, what it doesn't like. So yes, I hope you find it useful and I hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it. So, Calathea Orbifolia is native to the rainforests of South America and it's got a reputation of being quite a dramatic, difficult houseplant. And although, yes, if you're keeping it in conditions that it doesn't like, if you're not giving it exactly what it needs, it can be one that will throw a tantrum pretty quickly. On the whole, I would actually say once you get used to what it likes and doesn't like, it's actually a fairly easy houseplant. This plant genuinely used to be one that just stressed me out so much. I was always kind of doing all the right things and fussing over it a lot and just trying to do everything I could to keep it happy, and it was not happy. So the first thing, very, very important, the first thing you need to do is find a spot for your Calathea, a spot that's right for it, that's providing it with all the right conditions. And once you've found that spot, and I will go over the details of finding that spot in a minute, but once you've found that spot, don't move it about too much, don't faff over it, because in general, it is just a plant that quite likes to be left alone to do its thing. So when finding the right spot for your Calathea Orbifolia, the most important thing to take into consideration is light. I know with a lot of my tropical plants, I always say that they do best in bright indirect light, but if you look at the environment that this one naturally grows in, it actually grows very close to the canopy floor and therefore is going to grow best in filtered light or partial shade. I've actually got mine downstairs in my basement bedroom with me at the moment, which is north facing, and this plant is about 2 meters back from a north facing window, so it really doesn't get a huge amount of natural light at all, and it definitely never receives any bright lights like bright sun or anything like that. It is such a sensitive plant, and honestly, pretty much any direct sun can cause this plant to burn fairly quickly. So if you're noticing browning patches on the leaves and you do have it in a fairly high light spot, I would definitely consider moving it out of that area and to somewhere with much gentler light so that your plant can just absorb what it needs and not be overwhelmed by it. Although yes, it is considered to be a low light plant, do not mistake low light for no light. I've seen people putting their plants in rooms with no windows and stuff like that, and this plant does need some light. It just needs very, very, very gentle light. And also on the note of that as well, it's really important to make sure your plant's able to receive all of the light that it's getting in order to photosynthesize and grow healthily. So keeping its leaves clean is so important. I always say use a microfiber cloth or a damp sponge or something like that, which is what I do for most of my plants. However, I have recently discovered microfiber gloves, and oh my goodness, they are an absolute game changer. It's literally the easiest thing in the world. You can just go around, give your plants a really, really good check, a wipe over, make sure they're nice and clean, make sure that they're free from dust and dirt. Also, dust and dirt does make these plants a lot more susceptible to pests, and this is probably the worst thing about Calatheas. They are like a magnet for pests, particularly spider mites in my experience. So whenever I go around and I give my plants a good wipe over, which I try to do every couple of weeks, I don't always stick to that, but technically it should be every couple of weeks. I also just take the opportunity to check for pests, most commonly with, lots of pests, but particularly spider mites. You often notice them on the undersides of the leaves first, and they are so teeny tiny microscopic. Sometimes you don't actually see the pests themselves to start with. It's just a really good idea to look for webbing, to look for any sandy residue, sticky residue, any kind of weird discoloration on the leaves that doesn't look normal, because chances are if it is not looking normal, then it's probably not normal and it might be something to investigate. I have made a specific video on how I go about treating pests if I find them, so I will link that video in the description box below. But the other really important thing with Calatheas is if you want all of its growth to kind of be 360, nice and full and not just growing in one direction, then it's a really good idea if you have just got one light source to rotate your plant's pot on a regular basis, just because, as I say, if you don't do that, you're probably going to notice its growth all kind of lean off to one side and it's not going to be even, it's not going to look as lovely. That also just allows your plant to absorb equal amounts of light from all angles so that none of the leaves are getting missed. The next really important thing to talk about with this plant, and I think this is the area where a lot of people, including myself in the past, have gone very wrong, is watering. So Calatheas are a plant that like their soil to remain kind of evenly moist at all times, but it's so easy when you say even moisture in soil for people to kind of think, oh, okay, I need to water it all the time, and they end up overwatering and causing root rot. Root rot, if you hadn't already guessed by the name, is basically where your plant's roots start to rot, and it can bring down your plant really, really quickly if it's left untreated. So monitoring the soil and making sure you're giving your plants the right amount of water is so important. I've got pretty much all of my houseplants in nursery pots, and I just decorate the nursery pots. I just personally like doing it this way because it saves money, and also it means that I know that my plants are going to be able to really effectively drain after I water them, because one of the main causes of root rot is when you give your plants too much water, they can't absorb it and they don't have good enough drainage to let the excess water drain through. So even if you are using a ceramic pot or something like that, or a pretty pot that does not have drainage, I would always leave your plants in the nursery pot inside that so that you can take them out, water them each time, and then pop them back in. And although this is a plant that doesn't particularly like its soil to dry out, as I've said in many of my plant care videos, if you're in any doubt, then underwatering is always better than overwatering. And I always bang on about that simply because in general, it's so much easier to bring a plant back from near death if it's been underwatered as opposed to overwatered. So at the moment, I'm watering my Calathea probably about once a week-ish. I wouldn't say ever sticking to any kind of watering schedule is a good idea. I think monitoring the soil is always the most important thing because everybody's home environment's different. Soil is going to dry out at different rates, but I usually just wait until the top layer of soil feels dry to the touch, and when it does, I give it a thorough soak through, pop it back in its happy spot, keep monitoring it, and then wait until that top layer of soil's dried out again. When I say top layer of soil, I know with some plants they'll say like the top inch or the top 4 inches. With this one, I literally just mean like a centimetre, like literally just the top layer. I also do get a lot of questions about what type of water you should be using for Calatheas, and back in the day when I was first kind of trying to learn about houseplants and, as I said before, get everything right, I was only using either filtered water or rainwater for my Calatheas. And yes, although it kept them happy, it was too much effort, especially when you've got lots of plants. I don't think it is realistic or practical to do that all the time. So nowadays I do just use tap water. I'm aware that obviously if you live right in the middle of a city or something like that, the water's going to have different chemical balances, some of which can affect Calatheas quite badly because they are quite sensitive plants. But what I tend to do nowadays is I'll just fill my watering can up the day before I water my sensitive plants, and I'll leave that to sit out so that any chemicals such as chlorine and stuff like that have time to evaporate and the plants aren't getting so many nasty chemicals, minerals, all of that sort of stuff when I do water them. It is also really important to say that if you live somewhere with a water softener, this is not great for your plants just because the levels of sodium are so high. I personally have never had a water softener, so I haven't experienced it firsthand, but I know lots of people that have had lots and lots of issues because they use that water. So if that's the only option and your plants aren't looking that happy, then I would potentially consider switching to, as I say, rainwater, filtered water, distilled water, but again, I know that is a bit of a faff. The other thing to say along with watering is that when your plants are actively growing, it's a really, really good idea to introduce a fertilizer into your watering routine just to help encourage and support any new growth. I always used to say only fertilize over the spring and summer months, but I did a little experiment last winter where I took 2 identical plants, fertilized one, not the other, and now my opinion has changed. So yes, when your plant is actively growing, that is when I would recommend fertilizing. And I personally use a fertilizer called Liquid Gold Leaf. I use it on all of my houseplants. I've banged on about it so many times before in so many different videos, but it is honestly amazing stuff. So if you're able to get it, that is what I would personally recommend. But with whatever fertilizer you're using, and again, I know I've said this before, I know I'm repeating myself, but if you've got a plant that you've had for a while, it's been in the same soil and you've never fertilized it, I personally would recommend easing it into fertilizer quite gently, just so that you don't overdo it and you don't cause any issues, because sometimes if your plant's got used to living in a very low nutrient soil and you suddenly come in with a hit of fertilizer, it can send it into shock and it can cause issues. So I would personally start with a little bit less than it says on the bottle and gradually build it up over time. When it comes to temperature for these plants, again, it's a really good idea to look at their origins, look at where they come from and kind of gauge it from that. However, I have found that mine do best in probably between about 18 to 26 degrees Celsius. They are 100% capable of surviving in lower temperatures, especially lower temperature drops at night, like downstairs in my basement where mine's living at the moment. It does get pretty cold, and this one still is doing well for me, but as I say, I know this with pretty much all of my tropical plants. When you do raise the temperature, so long as you obviously balance that with light and humidity, it does tend to equal much faster growth. Something that kind of crosses over from temperature to humidity is the fact that artificial heating and cooling systems that a lot of us use in our home, radiators, aircon, all that sort of stuff, does really take its toll on this plant. This is a humidity loving plant. Calatheas absolutely love humidity. The more you can give them, the better. I've currently got my humidifier down in my room set to about 80%. It doesn't always stay like that in there, and I don't have it running the whole time, but I usually try to keep the humidity between 70 and 80% for this plant, just because, again, if it's not getting enough humidity, the classic thing you're going to notice first is kind of browning edges, browning tips. The leaves just aren't going to look as healthy and conditioned as they could. So if you are in any doubt about humidity and you can raise the levels, crank it up as high as you can, and this one is going to be super, super, super happy. I know obviously with the current financial situation, it's not always doable to run a humidifier all the time. They can be quite expensive to run. So there are some DIY things that you can do as well that cost nothing but will keep your plants happy. You can use pebble trays, which are basically a tray that your plant's pot just sits on like that, filled with pebbles, and then you fill them with water so the roots of your plant never actually touch the water. It's not going to cause root rot or anything like that, but as the water evaporates, it just creates a bit of extra humidity for your plants. You can also leave cups of boiling water out around your house if you're cooking, if you're boiling vegetables or anything like that. That can help to naturally increase the humidity. Even just grouping plants together, grouping lots of plants together, because as plants transpire naturally, they do produce humidity, so they essentially act as a humidifier for each other, and it is an excuse to buy more plants. But yeah, I feel like that's kind of the gist of it with this plant. That's definitely everything I'm doing to keep mine happy. As I said at the beginning, the most important thing I think is just once you found a spot where it's happy, don't faff over it too much. I only ever move mine if I'm rotating the pot or I'm bringing it to water it. Apart from that, I just let it do its thing. I dust it every so often, and that is about it. But if you've got any questions or anything like that, then pop them down below and I will try and make sure to cover them in a video at some point. But yes, I really hope that this video was useful. If it was, please make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, have a lovely day, and I will see you in the next video.